Oh, it's already 3:31. I didn't even realize. Welcome our My Perspectives curriculum specific group. Excited to have us here together today to do a deep dive into some looking at our own instructional materials and really building on the work that we started last month in our February retreat day, thinking about what strong writing instruction looks like and means for our materials. But really today with the opportunity to dig in and start thinking about a writing task that you'll be using with your own students. So excited to do that with you all today. Let's get started with a quick team builder, which is look at the animal options here on this screen and select which animal best describes yourself as a learner today at 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Which animal best describes yourself as a learner today? Put it in the chat.
Let's see, which one of these has the wiggles? I might have to choose the All right, if you just joined us, we are right here on this slide, typing in the chat, which animal best describes yourself as a learner today? Why?
I think I'm thinking about this question way too hard. I'm like, is that me?
I know, and I just realized I didn't really follow the directions, so I better. And why? I didn't get the and why in there. Ooh, Jetta, that's good. That's such a literacy person response.
I edited it like I had two different animal choices before that. I was in an indecisive mood, you know.
Got a couple turtles, it looks like, which is totally all right.
Okay, well, glad to have our whole crazy animal zoo here with us today. No matter what mood you're in, let's go ahead and jump into the session. So here's our agenda. We're going to spend a little bit of time at the beginning revisiting just our network why, what brings us all here, what's our larger purpose, why does it matter to the students we serve, and then we'll spend the rest of the session on writing instruction, building on our February session. We'll do a little bit of a student empathy experience and explore and try out some effective writing instruction. And then we'll look at our own materials. We asked you all for today's session to bring a writing task to look at and practice with, and we're gonna practice crafting exemplar responses to those in today's session. So we'll actually get to put on our student hats and do some writing as our students would today. Here are our objectives. I'll give everybody a moment to read those. So as I shared, we're going to do some reconnecting with our purpose as a network. We're going to look at specifically a strategy around sentence expansion and talk about how that connects to some of the best practices for writing that we've learned about. Then we'll spend time on writing an exemplar response and really thinking about how that prepares us to teach that writing task and do a little bit of reflection on preparing for instruction. Okay, I'll hand it to you, Bethany.
Yeah. All right. So real quickly, we'll just take maybe about 5-6 minutes or so to just take some time to reconnect, right? We know we're about to jump into a crazy time of the school year, right? It's spring. Yes, there's some spring break coming up, but it's spring, right? And all the things that spring brings. So just a quick reminder about why we're doing this thing with the Strong Start Network. So just a reminder that, this is an EIR grant, which just means this is part of a process to explore, right? To think about innovation, to get on the ground and figure out what works in your context. And for us as a network, we chose kind of our focus to be this adoption of new ELA materials. We wanted to offer support around that process that everybody was going to be in as ELA instructors, and really establish a lead learner type community, right? That's you all, right? Who can champion this work. Many of you have been called on to be that lead learner back in your districts already, and will be called to do that in the future, no doubt, as you all have really championed this work of using these new materials and really trying to understand them and how they best work in our classrooms and connect with the needs of our students. So with that in mind, we learned from research that just because you adopt new materials doesn't mean everything's going to go all like sunshine and rainbows and everybody's doing amazing, right? In fact, the research said that partnered with new materials is the need for systematic professional learning, right? That's tied to using those materials in the actual context, right? So not just kind of vaguely talking about how a teacher might use these materials with, hypothetical students, but real teachers in their real classrooms and their real schools with all the other things that swirl around, right, in the world of school, and how you manage to implement and think about the change process that's involved with starting a new or utilizing a new curriculum, right? So that's really at the heart of what this network was about, was to kind of be this secret sauce, right? To be this learning community and to help us think about these materials in a community where we could learn and share from and with each other. So we wrote this, remember, way back in the summer, we started this idea of who we are, what would be our narrative. So I just wanted us to come back to it and do a quick kind of in the chat as you reread this network narrative, which was made up of all this language that you all created as first individual teams and what your team narrative was. And then when we put it together as a group of teams, committed to the work of the Strong Start Network. In the chat, what verb-led, so think about your verbs, what verb-led phrases speak to who we are and what we do, right, as the Strong Start Network. So for an example, I might put in the chat, I think it's maybe the third line down, right, that we advocate for the success of every middle school student. Right. So that is a type of phrase I want us to be looking for, to be reflecting on, and dropping in the chat. Right. So let's take a couple minutes to reread this narrative, remind ourselves who we are, and then to drop in the chat some reflections about that. All right. I know it can seem maybe kind of hokey or silly to kind of revisit this who we are, but I think it's so powerful, especially in all the busy of spring. One, for us to kind of finish the year strong, right? To connect back to what our aspirations were as a network. And I can see that you all were calling out the very things that I think we intended to be doing, right, in this network, to engage in deep professional learning, to figure out how we empower all students to be successful. And we've talked about a lot about that these last couple of years as part of the network. Explore the impact of our teaching, right? That we're very evidence-based. We're really looking to evidence in our classrooms that something's working or that it's not, right? And then to talk about what we might do differently for our students. And again, all that's to advocate for the success of our students. And one way that we've definitely talked about doing that is to think about those grade appropriate assignments that give them that real opportunity to engage in work that meets the expectations of the standards. Oh, and I love here that Derek added, yeah, reflecting on our practices, right? Thinking again about that grade appropriate instruction. And as we've talked about in some previous sessions, opportunities for deep engagement and how we as educators support those opportunities for deep engagement. We know that none of this just happens, right, by magic in the classroom. So thanks for engaging in that little bit of reflection. And Jetta, we can shift gears now, I believe, and think about some writing.
Okay, let's jump into writing instruction. So as I said, we wanted the today's session to really build on our February retreat session, where we really focused on sort of naming what are our best practices for writing instruction. Today's session in our curriculum specific group is really focused on like, what does that look like in classroom practice and in our instructional materials in particular. So I wanted to zoom in on one strategy in particular and use that as a bit of a model of what are some of the types of best practices of writing instruction that we can use and implement that reflect some of those bigger principles that we talked about last month. So we're going to kind of use this as let's say a case study or an example. Okay, so just as a reminder, these were the principles that we talked about last month. You've lived a whole life since we last met in February, so let me just recap these a bit. Remember that we talked about how writing instruction needs to be explicit, that students need to be taught how to write. We don't just give them writing tasks, we explicitly teach them the best practices of writing, and we should begin that in the early grades. That's unrelated to you all as middle school teachers, but I think really important to know that that should be happening throughout students' experience of schooling. Writing instruction should be evidence-based. Writing should be grounded in the content that students are learning and the knowledge they are building. We want students to learn about the world through text and then have the opportunity to write about what they have learned through text. And then it should be routine and embedded. So students should have frequent opportunities to practice writing every single day in a variety of contexts, starting in the early grades, right? We shouldn't wait till the end of the unit to just have one, formal writing piece. There should be informal, formative types of writing happening across content areas throughout the day for all of our students. And then lastly, it should be iterative, meaning that, focused on opportunities to revise and plan your writing, incorporating feedback along the way. So as we go through today's session, I want you to keep these principles in mind and think about where do you see some examples of these principles in our materials, and how can we amplify these principles in our implementation of our materials, right? So across all of the high quality instructional materials that we use across districts, my perspectives included, these principles I think are very apparent in how our materials address writing instruction. But as we have talked about many times before, curriculum is just a tool, right? It's all about how we use it with our students. And so really thinking about, okay, if I know these are the best practices of writing instruction, how do I amplify that in how I implement my materials approach to writing instruction? Okay, so let's zoom in on that one particular strategy I talked about. We're going to talk about sentence expansion, which is a strategy that gets highlighted a lot in Writing Revolution, which we read the forward to in our last meeting, and it's a great writing resource. So what is sentence expansion? It is the opportunity to provide students with explicit instruction on how to revise sentences by adding content, by revising syntax, or by refining word choice, right? So it is exactly as described. It is the process of expanding our sentences, and it can be a really powerful way to get students to think about, one, just the active revision, right? That the first time we write something is not permanent, right? But that we can build on our writing, and doing it at the sentence level, I think, can be a good access point for a lot of students. But it also helps students learn some of the craft of writing, right? Like, how do you take this simple sentence and add layers of meaning to it, or nuance, or a word choice that better expresses your opinions, right? So having that sort of attention to craft at that sentence level, again, is a really good access point for a lot of our middle school students. So how does sentence expansion work? You're beginning with a starter sentence, so some beginning sentence. This could be a sentence that you provide the students, or it can be selected from the student's own writing. And then the next step is you provide some prompting questions or sentence stems, some guidance for students to build out additional ideas to build out the sentence. So the example that is often used in Writing Revolution is the because, but, so, and that's just a framing that ask students to start with their starter sentence and then say, because, like, why did this happen? But what is something in contrast to it? And so, like, why does it matter, right? And if students can fill that out and then come back to their sentence and add on to it, they've add layers of meaning and complexity to that starter sentence they started with. You model this for students for how to incorporate those additional ideas into the base sentence. So hopefully this will make a little bit more sense if we see a model, then try it out ourselves. So we're going to watch a video sample of a teacher implementing because, but, so with students. As we watch, I want you to reflect on how does the structure of because, but, so help students develop as writers? And what does the teacher do to ensure that students own the thinking in this lesson? I might need to share audio. Hold on one second. Hold on. Sorry, guys, give me 1 second. It's not playing. Okay, I got it. Just give me a second to share my screen again. Sorry about that. Here we go.
What you're about to see is our students working with a strategy called because, but, and so. We use it really to drive at 3 outcomes. 1, it assists with comprehension, and it gives students an opportunity to think reflectively about the content. It helps the students write with increasingly complex sentences, and it also gives students an opportunity to rehearse with the evidence they'll be using when we finally get to our culminating activity. And on 78, we're learning about Henry Hudson. I'm going to read. When you hear me pause, that's when you jump in with the next word so that we know that everybody's on the same page as me. As you have countries involved in the space trade were eager to find a quicker way to reach Asia from Northern Europe. In 1609, the Dutch East India Company hired an explorer named Henry Hudson. Hudson wanted to be an explorer who found the Northwest Passage that everyone was seeking. All right. We need somebody to continue reading for me on page 79. All right, Nick, call on somebody for me. Right there.
Hudson took a small crew on a small ship called the Half Moon. He sailed north along the coast of Norway. The farther north the Half Moon traveled, the colder and icier it got. The crew began to grumble. Conditions on the ship went from bad to worse. Hudson had planned to find a passage that would take him to the North Pole and down to the Malaya Archipelago. Instead, he changed his mind and headed west.
Nicely done. All right, call on somebody to read the next paragraph.
Okay. Hudson charted the Half Moon's course down the Atlantic coast. The Atlantic coast of North America to find the Northwest Passage at the mouth of what is now the Hudson River. He claimed the land for the Netherlands.
All right, and so who did Henry Hudson sail for?
Do I call it from them?
Yeah, I'm sure you have enough answer.
Okay. The Netherlands.
Okay, so he's Dutch, or he's sailing for the Dutch or for the country of the Netherlands, or the region of the Netherlands. For the first few days that the Half Moon sailed up the Hudson River, Hudson must have felt great
Excitement.
The river was wide. You're going to find your writing coach, and you're going to remind them, when do we use the conjunction because? When do we use but? When do we use so? And then we're going to call on somebody at random to teach. Aaron. Dawson. When do you use because? When do you use so?
To show cause and effect.
He's kind of good at this. Rudy Red. Number 2. So what we're going to do now, we'll have you teach in just a moment. You're going to get your stems. You need to finish each one of these with because, but, or so, or excuse me, you need to finish the stems based on the conjunction. Henry Hudson searched for a Northwest Passage because Henry Hudson searched for a Northwest Passage, but Henry Hudson searched for a Northwest Passage, so. I guess a couple of shots kids working. How come he's the wants to find a Northwest Passage? What is he really looking for? You're going to read either your best sentence to your writing coach, or you're going to ask for help on which one you're struggling with. So read your best one or the one you're struggling with. Dawson, you can work with Aaron. Mutiny. That's good. If you're struggling with the so, read her so. What was your so? Do you have a so? What was your so going to be? All right. What's your so? Well, that's what you guys are meeting for. All right, loud and proud, Wade.
I said Henry Hudson searched for the Northwest Passage because he wanted to find the Spice Islands. Okay.
Let's keep it with because. See if somebody has a different because.
Hudson searched for the Northwest Passage because Hudson needed a shortcut to get to the Spice Islands.
Okay.
did Henry Hudson search for a Northwest Passage, but his crew mutinied?
I agree.
I did Henry Hudson search for a Northwest Passage so he could get to the Spice Islands.
Okay. Do we all agree? All right.
Okay. Kira. I just want to put on to Well, I said Henry Hudson searched for a Northwest Passage so he could get to the Spice Islands quicker.
Okay. All right, Aaron, loud and proud.
Okay. Henry Hudson searched for a Northwest Passage, but he ended up in what is now Hudson Bay.
Okay, nicely done. That is a different detail. And if you have your hand up, it's because you have, whatever you have has not been shared so far.
Okay, so let's would love to hear what you guys think about what we saw in that teacher's classroom. So how does the structure of Because But So help students develop as writers? And what does the teacher do to ensure the students own the thinking in this lesson? What are your thoughts? You guys can unmute and share. We're a small group today, or put in the chat, whatever you want.
A little louder.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there was a lot of systems and procedures in that classroom that kids clearly knew. Yes. Yeah, Jennifer, do you want to expand on this point you made in the chat at all? Because I really agree.
I just think that it shows that we all have room for improvement. It gives them an opportunity to show where they felt strong, but it also can help build them by working with others.
Yes. Yeah, I love that when the students are they're almost doing like a show call at the end, right? Where they're, putting their work up in front. And there isn't this sense that like there isn't a sense there's one right answer, right? They're looking at the different ones and evaluating them and like how it's communicated. So I think that's a really great point too.
It shows that it's a safe space.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree on this like point that it gives students a place to start. But then Christy, your point here about like it really helps prompt them on where to keep going. One of the things I think is so like beautiful about this strategy is just how it is both very simple and very complex at the same time, right? Like it seems very simple to just start with these three conjunctions that we use all the time in language and ask students to respond to them. But if you think about it, thinking about, taking a concept and thinking about what's the causal relationship of it, what's the impact of it, what were some, conflicts within it, that is exactly the type of complexity we want students applying to the text they're reading, right? And being able to write and communicate about in that way. And so it pushes students to not just write more about the topic, but to write with greater complexity about the topic.
Jetta, I'll agree. I think what stood out to me was, like you said, this idea of simple yet complex. I mean, it's grounded in the text, right? So it's not just, giving them random sentences to practice with these, conjunctions. But the fact that there was a lead off, right, that was grounded in the text. And to his point there at the end, we're adding detail, right? So the point is that I'm pulling detail that serves as an example of the information that I've gathered that ties to this conjunction, that there's something about impact, there's something about some kind of contrast, or to the point that you made there. And so then him facilitating that discussion of what's an additional detail, what might I add on? I heard one student say that, I'll add on, knowing that they had a little bit of a different detail or something that could continue to help everyone expand their thinking about the topic.
Yes, absolutely. I love the point, Derek, you raised in the chat here around like it's asking students to probe their thinking or calling for more precision in their thinking, right? It isn't just to the point I just made and Bethany added on to there. It's not just writing more about Henry Hudson, but it's trying to be more precise and probe and analyze what you've learned about Henry Hudson from the text. Okay, great. So let's give out this, we're going to try out this sentence expansion process a bit for ourselves. And I'm going to use a different approach from Because But So, but building on a similar idea, another sentence expansion strategy. So the way this works, we're going to expand the sentence. I'm going to give you a kernel sentence, so a starter sentence. Then I'm going to give you a short text to read and answer some questions from reading the text. And then you're going to write an expanded version of the kernel sentence. So I'm going to walk you guys through this. So our kernel sentence that we're starting with is, she started a movement. In your materials that Bethany just linked in the chat, in your handout, there is a short, I promise I'm not asking you to read a bunch, but there's a short speech from President Obama about Rosa Parks. You are going to read that speech, and I want you to answer these who, what, when, where, and why questions from your reading of the text. And then after you do that, I want you to write an expanded sentence. So build on that sentence of she started a movement using what you gained from your 5 W's. Questions before I give you time to write and read. Okay, I'm gonna give everybody about 5 minutes, so not a long time. Okay, you have about under a minute. So if you haven't written your expanded sentence, give it a try. You guys ready to share? You need more time.
I need 30 more seconds.
Okay, 30 more seconds. Love watching people's pensive writing faces over Zoom windows. That's not why I did this activity, but it's an added bonus for me. Oh, great. I was just about to say, if you would, I would love to see a few samples in the chat. If people want to enter their sentence in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourselves and share. Let's see some sample sentences that people came up with. Okay, wait. Oh, okay, good. You got some more.
That's just mine. I don't know.
Okay.
I felt
Okay.
rushed.
I'm
does
taking you
bring-
guys through a speed version of this.
But it does make you, I mean, it makes you empathize. I mean, I think I've said this before, but the writing process is it's a vulnerable thing, right? You're putting your ideas out there for others to, let's face it, judge. So our kids probably feel equally, anxious about it sometimes. I think that's why that culture piece that we talked about just a little moment, a few moments ago is so important.
I love doing this activity, even with it's incredible with kids. I even like doing it with adults, just because you get to see, like, everybody started with we have the same structure. We all read the same short text together, right? And there's a general same content to everybody's sentences you see here, but people lift up different ideas. There's different concepts that are elevated in one versus the other. And I think that is like a really great way to show students that point. There's different ways to communicate and different ideas that can be lifted up here. Like, let's study each other's craft a bit. So thank you guys to Bethany's point, being vulnerable enough to share and put your sample sentences in the chat. Here, I did a model one for you guys just to show you an example. That it doesn't have to be my who, what, when, where, why statements don't have to be. I'm seeing Amy, you guys are making, I can't tell if you guys are reacting. Amy's Zoom window. Anyway, it doesn't have to be extensive, right? Like you can show students a model of how to do this that isn't like you have to write a paragraph for each of these, right? You're just jotting down some notes to process your learning about the text, and then you're using what you learned about the text to inform the sentence that you write, right? And as I shared with the sentence expansion strategy in general, modeling for students how to do this is a crucial first step of this, right? I wouldn't just throw students into it the way I did with you all. But walking them through how to do it first with a quick model is really, really important. So let me ask you guys, what do you think students gain from this type of sentence expansion activity? And how does this expanded sentence activity align to our principles of effective writing? So being explicit, evidence-based, routine and embedded, or iterative? What do you guys think? Complex sentences. I love this point around we could look at the different phrases. Like I'm just looking at the sample sentences that people utilize. Like somebody used, a which phrase, somebody used despite, not only, right? Like how could we look at some of the phrases that folks used and how that informed the content of the sentences they wrote?
I love this idea of building confidence, because I think that's what this is, to me, a good example of. It's like a think aloud. I mean, as a writer, I know as an adult, as I'm crafting a sentence, I'm thinking in my head, who, what, when, where, there's little prompts I'm giving myself. And so supporting students in being able to do this allows them to build that capacity on their own, to be able to pick it up and use it as they develop their own writing.
Yeah, I think these types of strategies build on just the general idea of like, use a graphic organizer to help students, right? This goes beyond just a graphic organizer, but it's prompts to help organize their thinking, right? That helps organize their thinking before they begin to write. I think in doing that can help build their confidence, like, oh, wow, I have a lot to say about Rosa Parks, right? Rather than just starting with a blank page.
Judd, I'm going to say this phrase. I didn't invent it, but you can't write about what you don't know about. So this is that way to collect, right, information from the text so that I then have something to say, right, about whatever I'm being asked to convey. So
yes, agreed. And I do think I'm really glad we did this activity after we finished the knowledge gap in our last meeting, because I do think it really exemplifies a lot of what we read about in the knowledge gap, right? That and it pairs it with this topic of writing to that, to what Bethany just expressed there, that we want students to be building knowledge about the world through text, but we want their writing to reflect that as well, right? And so how do we pair activities in our writing instruction that give students the opportunity to communicate the things they have learned about the world through text? Okay, great. So we are going to dig into our own materials and spend some time in our own materials now. And we're going to practice writing an exemplar response. And so I want to start off by just naming, why is Jetta going to ask me to do this? It's Tuesday afternoon. Why do I have to go and write a student response? And sometimes our materials often will give us a model or exemplar response. And so you may be asking yourself, like, if my materials give me an exemplar response, why would I write one myself? And I think there's a couple of reasons. One is just anticipation. So when we craft an exemplar student response, it allows us to really articulate what the expectations for student writing will be and how they might respond to that prompt, right? So we can start to anticipate what we want to see from students. It is an exercise in empathy, just like our experience of doing the sentence expansion just was, right? It helps us go through the process and reflect on how students are going to experience it and see it through their eyes a bit. And then lastly, it helps us with that preparation piece, right? Start to think about what are the struggles students are going to have? What kind of scaffolds might they need? Where is this task more challenging or not? And additionally, that exemplar student response that you create can really serve as a roadmap for you for how to support your students who are struggling. So that's why we're doing it. I'm going to give you some time now. We asked you for today's session to bring some writing task. It can be a short formative assessment you're doing. It can be a larger writing task, but we wanted it to be some writing task that you're doing for an upcoming lesson that you haven't taught yet. Because the purpose of this is to really help inform your instruction. And for leaders, the same thing. We want you to be able to reflect on a writing task that you can go see your teachers implement, hopefully. So you're going to sort of go through 3 steps here. First, review the task. What are the expectations of the task? What's the success criteria? What will be asked of students? Then just jot down for yourself, what are the knowledge or skills? So what would students need to know or be able to do to successfully complete this task? And you're thinking about their like knowledge, for example, in the sentence expansion activity we just did, knowledge might be like facts about Rosa Parks. When did she not give up her seat on the bus? What was the impact of it, right? Those sorts of things about knowledge about Rosa Parks. The skills of that task might be how to craft a complex, complete sentence with detailed information about Rosa Parks, right? Something like that is like the skill that we're having students do versus the knowledge we want them to demonstrate. And then craft your exemplar response. So write an exemplar response for this prompt. One thing I always like to say with exemplar responses is you're not trying to write it totally in a student's voice. Like you don't have to make the same, errors your 6th graders might make, but you want to write it. It should be the model response that you would want to see for this prompt. If you brought a longer writing assignment, you brought an essay just now, and you're like, oh, Jenna's going to make me sit here and write an essay. You don't need to, we're not going to have enough time for that, but you might pick one piece of it. Like I'm going to write the introduction right now, or I'm going to draft an outline for it, or I'm going to write the claim or thesis statement for this essay. Pick one small piece of it if it feels too large to write the full exemplar response right now in this moment. So I'm going to give you guys some time to do this now and do some writing on your own. Some of you are in groups and in person together. If you want to work together, you can. If there's anyone on the call who's in a different Zoom window, but has someone that teaches the same grade level and wants to collaborate, you could chat Bethany or I, and we could put you in a breakout room if you want to work with someone. But you should also feel free to just like do this activity solo. And I think with that, I'm going to be quiet and give everybody some writing time. Are there any questions before we get started?
Jetta, do you want to preview at all what kind of reflection we're going to do on the back end of this so that folks could even keep that in mind?
Yeah, I can even show you the exact reflection questions. So after we do this, you're going to reflect on, what did you learn about the task by doing it? What do you think is going to be most difficult for students after doing it? And what supports or scaffolds might you want to put in place for students? So we're really going to think about what's the implementation of this assignment based on your experience of trying it out on your own. Okay, any other questions before we get started? Okay, I'm going to give everybody 10 minutes and then I'll check back in and see if folks need more time then. Feel free to turn your cameras off if you want while you write.
All right, I see the chat about a breakout room, so I'll get that set up.
Okay, that's 10 minutes. Do folks need more time? I'll give everybody one more minute. Bethany, you want to warn our breakout room?
Jetta, while folks are wrapping up, I see a white screen that you're sharing. I don't know if that's what we are
You know
intending.
what
but-
that is.
There we go. Now it's back.
Oh gosh.
Hey. So as we foreshadowed, we want to do some reflections on what this how this experience informs how you're thinking about this writing task and its implementation with students. And so I'm going to give everybody a moment to just reflect on these questions, and then I want to hear from you all and discuss. But let's think about, what did you learn about this task by writing your exemplar response? What do you think will be most challenging for your students in this task? And what supports or scaffolds could you put in place to address this challenge? So let me give everybody a minute to think about your responses to those questions. Okay, so I would love to hear from folks. We're a small group. Let's just discuss these. Let's start with this first question. So what did you learn about the task by writing your exemplar response?
I know it's 4:35, but what you got for us? What did we learn?
I mean, it can be as simple as like, oh, this was pretty straightforward. I think my students could do this. Like, it does not have to be, you know, big ahas.
I'll share one. I learned that there were really like 3 specific places I needed to go in the text to be able to answer this question. So it's like, I didn't have to, I had to have a general sense of the whole thing, but, when it came to like getting my thoughts together, what would I say? Like I found myself going back to specific places in the text, which also then led me to think about that third reflection question, but I'll wait.
I think that's really powerful, that oftentimes we can, by doing this, it can help you highlight like, what will students need from the text, but as we're reading that text, I should make sure they understand or be asking questions about or call their attention to, so when they go to do this writing, they're prepared for that. I think that's huge.
I like how Lincoln Hott said it's thinking about the nuances of the task. I would love to ask tell me more.
Yeah, tell us more. I can't, for some reason, when I open the chat, it turns the whole screen white, so I can't see it. But so if you guys could tell us what you were thinking there, that'd be great.
Okay, so I just meant by that, like our task asks us what can cause a significant change in someone's life. And we have to cite 3 different texts, but when we look at the text, 3 different things spurred a change in somebody's life. Like one was regret, one was just feeling like they had a higher calling, and then the other was an act of kindness. And so we have to quote evidence from all three of those. So I can't just, randomly think of what can cause a change in someone's life. I have to think big picture, how do those three things tie together, which is harder. So we can provide support for that by thinking, so we wrote for the exemplar thesis, we said, looking at your life from an outside perspective can cause a significant change in someone's life. That was what all three of those had in common, that they all kind of stepped back and took a look at their life as an outsider.
I love that, just all of that thinking you just shared, I feel like is a really good model of like, what is the value of doing these exemplar responses? Because what you articulated there was the thinking process that your students are going to have to do, right? Like you went back to the text and you said, okay, this is what caused the change in this text. This is what caused the change in this text. This is what caused the change in this text. So what does that mean for how I craft a thesis about the, change process for these three texts, right? And so by doing that exemplar, I'm just narrating for you what I saw you do there that I think will be helpful, which is you went through a thinking process that your students are going to have to go through too. And so now, having gone through that, you can think through, how do I shepherd my students through that, right? Like what supports will I need to give them so that they can identify all those same things that you were able to do as an adult expert reader in 10 minutes. For folks, reflections?
Is this on any of the questions, Jetta? Could folks
You can do
reflect
any of the
on-
questions now. I've opened the floodgates here. Think about what you think might be most challenging for students or how you could support them.
Jetta, that last question, it made me also think about this time of year. You know what I mean? Like, because scaffolds that maybe I provide at the beginning of the year might look a little different than I provide, later on in the year. So it just had me thinking, like, in what ways might I be able to guide without over scaffolding? As I tie back to our previous learning about student engagement, who's really owning the thinking, like making sure I don't overstep and that I don't end up doing the thinking. Like, it's cool that I prepared, but I got to now make sure that I don't give too much away as I'm trying to, I love that word you use, shepherd, as I'm trying to shepherd how my kiddos might get into this task, that I don't overstep.
Yeah, and I would just layer into that. I'm having so many conversations this time of year with different partners around, like, what do we do for test prep? How do we prepare students for testing, right? And a big piece of that, when we're using high quality instructional materials, it's not veering from our materials, but thinking about, how do I take away some of those scaffolds I've been providing, so to increase student independence so they're ready for those exams. Okay, well, thank you guys. I appreciate everybody putting on their writer hats today. I hope that in some ways, I think, like, I hardly ever make time for myself to do, like, writing aside from work writing. And so I think it'd be really nice to just, like, I'm going to carve out 10 minutes and write about something my students are going to write about and experience it as they do. And, the stronger we are as writers, the better we can help our students with that. So thank you guys for doing that. So as our follow-up from today's session, here is your homework. For teachers, we want you to implement the writing task that you reflected on today. So you've done some thinking about it, thought about what's going to be challenging, how to support your students. So try it out with your kids now. And then we're going to do our student work collection for the spring here. And we want you to collect 5 samples of student work from this writing task. And you're going to post it in the student work collection folders that Bethany will share in her follow-up email. And then in our April session, we're going to do a student work protocol, looking at student work protocol using that student work. So you'll post it in the folders, and then we'll come to the session and be prepared to share and reflect on that student work with your colleagues. For leaders, similar homework, but from the, one of the tasks you looked at, go and collect 5 samples of student work from one of those writing tasks, post it in the folders, and then come prepared to reflect and engage on the looking at student work protocol in our next meeting.
And if you didn't get all that, no worries. I'll have it all in an email. I may wait till maybe Thursday afternoon or even Friday to send that, just so I can send it to the whole network at one time. And so we'll have our Amplify group tomorrow. Guidebooks will be on Thursday. So watch for that email toward the end of the week. And man, I can't believe it. Look, it's going to be April before we know it. Right. We've done a lot this year as a group. So we'll be together again for deeper learning sessions around our curriculum materials, as Jetta was saying, in April. And then, so just watch for a follow-up email. And we are just so grateful that you came and you engaged in such a deep way this afternoon. And Jetta, anything else you might add before we wrap it up today?
No, I just appreciate you all so much. Thank you, guys.
Well, hang around if anybody has any questions. If not, have a good one.